The Palace of Versailles in the late 17th century was designed to be the absolute center of the civilized world. Under the reign of King Louis XIV, the Sun King, it was a gilded paradise of blinding splendor. Gold leaf covered the walls, crystal chandeliers illuminated opulent grand ballrooms, and fountains danced to classical symphonies. The nobility of France lived in suffocating luxury, wrapped in silk and velvet, competing for a single favorable glance from the king. But beneath this dazzling, gilded facade lay a dark, putrid rot. Behind the silk tapestries and painted ceilings, Versailles was a pit of ruthless ambition, paranoia, and jealousy. In a court where proximity to the king meant absolute power, rivals would do anything to climb the social ladder, or ensure their enemies fell from it. And in the dark, narrow alleys of Paris, just beyond the palace gates, a secret underground market was quietly thriving. An army of fortune-tellers, alchemists, unfrocked priests, and shadow herbalists were selling a very specific kind of solution to the nobility's problems. They called them inheritance powders. We call them poison. What began as a few quiet, mysterious deaths in noble households quickly spiraled into a nightmare that reached the very inner sanctum of the royal court. It revealed a secret cult operating in the shadows of Paris, a network performing sacrilegious rituals, black masses, and cold-blooded murder for the highest bidders in France. Tonight, we step into the gilded halls and subterranean dark altars of 17th-century France to uncover one of the most shocking, high-level conspiracies in human history. Welcome to Midnight Mysteries. Are you ready to learn the truth? To understand how a secret cult infiltrated the royal court, we must go back to the mid-1670s. Paris was suddenly gripped by a string of sudden, inexplicable deaths among high-ranking aristocrats. Wealthy lords, wealthy heirs, and powerful statesmen were falling violently ill overnight. They suffered from burning internal pain, sudden paralysis, and agonizing deaths that baffled the finest royal physicians. At first, these deaths were chalked up to mysterious illnesses or natural heart failures. But whispers began to circulate through the corridors of Versailles. The poison of choice was arsenic, colorless, odorless, virtually untraceable with the medical technology of the day, and easily hidden in a glass of fine wine or a sweetened pastry. The tipping point came in 1876 with the dramatic trial and execution of the Marquise de Brinvilliers. The Marquise was a glamorous, high-society noblewoman who, alongside her lover, had spent years systematically poisoning her own father and two brothers using arsenic just to inherit the family fortune and pay off her astronomical debts. To perfect her deadly recipes, she had frequented charitable hospitals, posing as a caring benefactor while secretly giving poisoned sweets to sick patients to test which dosages killed the fastest without leaving physical traces. When her secret laboratory was raided and her letters were exposed, the French public was horrified. The Marquise was tortured, beheaded, and burned at the stake. But her execution didn't end the terror. It ignited a massive wave of paranoia. The king realized that poisoning wasn't an isolated family crime. It was an epidemic sweeping through high society. Realizing that his own court might be crawling with assassins, Louis XIV acted with absolute ruthless authority. In 1879, he established a secret special tribunal known as the Chamber Ardente, the Burning Court. Operating in a dark room hung with black drapes, lit only by candles, this court was granted supreme power to arrest, interrogate, torture, and execute anyone suspected of dealing in toxic compounds, witchcraft, or treason. The investigators of the Burning Court began sweeping through the underworld of Paris, rounding up fortune-tellers, street astrologers, and back-alley potion makers. It didn't take long for all roads to lead to one terrifying woman, Catherine Voisin, known to history simply as La Voisin. On the surface, La Voisin was a respectable, wealthy businesswoman living in a sprawling mansion in the suburbs of Paris. She presented herself as a skilled midwife, fortune-teller, and beauty consultant to the aristocratic women of Versailles. Nobles who wished to secure a lover, keep a husband from straying, or peek into their political futures flocked to her private parlors. In reality, La Voisin was the ruthless mastermind of an expansive, highly organized criminal syndicate. Her mansion was equipped with hidden laboratories, dark ceremonial chambers, and private gardens planted with lethal nightshade, belladonna, hemlock, and arsenic. If a noblewoman came to La Voisin wanting her husband's affection back, she offered love potions laced with Spanish fly or animal blood. But if that failed, or if the client grew impatient for a vast inheritance, La Voisin offered a far more permanent solution: her inheritance powders. For astronomical sums of money, La Voisin supplied toxic concoctions that could kill a targeted victim over weeks, making it look like a lingering illness, or instantly in a single night. When the Burning Court raided La Voisin's estate in March 1679, the true horror of her operations came to light. Interrogations under severe torture revealed that her network wasn't just selling poison. They were running an underground occult cult. La Voisin had allied herself with renegade, disgraced Catholic priests, most notably a sinister figure named Etienne Gibourg. Together, they performed sacrilegious black masses in pitch-black cellars for elite clients. Noblewomen dressed in black velvet masks would lie naked on makeshift altars, while defrocked priests performed distorted rituals, invoking demons and chanting curses over blood, poison, and host wafers. They prayed not to God, but to dark entities, asking for the death of rivals, the affection of lovers, and the continued favor of the Sun King himself. As La Voisin and her accomplices were subjected to brutal torture in the dungeons of Paris, the Burning Court expected to catch low-level criminals and desperate social climbers. But as the confessions poured out, the judges were paralyzed with terror. The names being named weren't just street peasants or minor lords. They were the most powerful men and women in France. Duchesses, princesses, marshals of the royal army, and closest advisors to the king were implicated. Over 400 suspects were named, and more than 300 warrants for arrest were issued. The scandal, now officially dubbed L'Affaire de Poisons, the Affair of the Poisons, threatened to tear the royal government apart. Then came the final, devastating blow. Confessions from La Voisin's daughter and her closest conspirators pointed the finger directly into the king's own bedchamber. The primary client behind the darkest rituals was none other than the official royal mistress, the most powerful woman in France, and the mother of 7 of the king's children. Driven by a desperate, obsessive fear of losing the king's love to younger, rival court women, Madame de Montespan had been secretly visiting La Voisin for over a decade. She had purchased love potions, containing horrifying ingredients like crushed dried moles, bat blood, and aphrodisiac toxins, and secretly slipped them into the Sun King's food and wine. Even worse, testimony revealed that as Louis XIV began to pull away from her, Montespan's desperation turned to dark vengeance. She had allegedly paid for black masses to be performed over her own body, cursing her romantic rivals to fall ill and die. When that failed to win back the king's exclusive devotion, the ultimate treason was plotted. Madame de Montespan had contracted La Voisin to supply a lethal dose of poison meant for King Louis XIV himself. The realization that his own mistress, the woman who shared his bed and bore his children, had been drugging him and plotting his assassination sent shockwaves through Louis XIV. The entire legitimacy of the French monarchy was hanging on a razor's edge. If the public and foreign rival nations learned that the court of Versailles was a hotbed of poisoning, cultic rituals, and attempted regicide, the Sun King's absolute authority would shatter overnight. In February 1680, Catherine Monvoisin, La Voisin, was found guilty of witchcraft and murder. She was burned at the stake in the center of Paris, taking many of her clients' deepest secrets to the flames. Shortly after her execution, King Louis XIV made a cold, calculated executive decision. He abruptly suspended the public proceedings of the Burning Court. He ordered all official records, transcripts, and confessions that mentioned Madame de Montespan to be gathered, sealed, and personally burned in his presence. The high-ranking nobles involved were quietly exiled from court or stripped of their titles, spared the gallows to avoid public disgrace. Madame de Montespan was never publicly tried or executed. Instead, she was silently pushed out of the royal inner circle, eventually retiring to a monastery in shame. Meanwhile, dozens of lower-class poisoners, alchemists, and defrocked priests were locked away forever in dark dungeons across France, chained to walls in total isolation so their mouths could never speak the names of the royalty they had served. In 1682, Louis XIV issued an edict banning the sale of poisons, regulating apothecaries, and outlawing the practice of fortune-telling and magic across the realm. The affair of the poisons was officially declared over, buried beneath a mountain of erased history and royal propaganda. The poison affair remains one of the most chilling chapters in history, a stark, terrifying reminder that behind the brightest golden crowns and grandest royal palaces, human ambition, jealousy, and fear can drive even the highest ranks of society straight into the darkest shadows. If you were captivated by this deep dive into historical dark intrigue, hit the like button, subscribe to Midnight Mysteries, and click the notification bell so you never miss a journey into the shadows. Leave a comment below. Do you think Madame de Montespan truly tried to poison the king, or was she framed by rivals in court? This was Midnight Mysteries. See you in the next video.